The structure of the Inquisition itself was hierarchical and bureaucratic. At the top sat the Inquisitor General, appointed by the Crown with papal approval. Below him were regional tribunals, each staffed with inquisitors, usually Dominican or Franciscan friars, trained in theology and law. These men wielded enormous power with little oversight. Supporting them were layers of officials. Fiscal prosecutors who built cases, notaries who recorded every word spoken in interrogations, bailiffs who managed prisoners, and physicians who monitored torture sessions to ensure the accused did not die before confessing. Yes, physicians. Medical professionals stood in torture chambers, not to stop the pain, but to calibrate it, to ensure that suffering could continue as long as necessary without causing death. Their presence gave the proceedings a veneer of measured professionalism, as if what happened in those rooms was science rather than savagery. The process itself unfolded in stages. After arrest came the period of isolation. Then, initial interrogation sessions where the accused was questioned about their faith, their practices, their associations. These interrogations could be gentle at first, almost conversational. The inquisitor might express sympathy, suggest that cooperation would lead to leniency. But if you did not confess or if your confession was deemed insufficient, the tone shifted. You would be shown the instruments, taken to the torture chamber. The tools would be explained to you in clinical detail, how they worked, what they would do to your body. This was called territio, the showing of the instruments, and it was, in itself, considered a form of torture. Many people broke at this stage, confessing to anything just to avoid what came next. But not everyone broke. Some women, even faced with the reality of what awaited them, refused to lie. Refused to confess to heresies they had not committed. Refused to name others in false accusations that would spread the net of persecution wider. And for them, the instruments were not merely shown. They were used. The Inquisition kept meticulous records. Court documents survive in archives span thousands of pages, detailing accusations, interrogations, and torture sessions. These records are clinical in their brutality. They list the devices used, the duration of sessions, the words spoken by the accused as pain tore through their bodies. Reading them now is an exercise in horror, but it is also an exercise in witnessing. Because these women whose names were recorded by their torturers deserve to be remembered not just as victims, but as human beings who endured the unendurable. The system that destroyed them was not an anomaly. It was not the work of a few sadistic individuals. It was institutional. It was legal. It was sanctioned by the highest authorities in church and state. And the devices they used were not arbitrary. They were chosen, refined, deployed with specific intent. So what were these instruments? How did they work? And what did they reveal about the intersection of power, faith, and the female body? That's where we turn next. The torture chamber was not a place of chaos. It was a place of terrible order. Stone walls, iron chains anchored to beams, a wooden table with restraints, and in the corner, arranged with the precision of surgical tools, the devices themselves. Each one had a name. Each one had a purpose. And each one was designed to transform the human body into a source of confession. For women brought before the Inquisition, these instruments represented more than physical pain. They represented the ultimate assertion of control over their bodies, their voices, their very existence. Let's be clear about what we're discussing. These were not relics of ancient barbarity. These were tools used by educated men, blessed by religious authority, employed within a legal framework that considered torture a legitimate means of discovering truth. The horror lies not just in the devices themselves, but in the system that made them routine. The rack was perhaps the most infamous torture device in the Inquisition's arsenal, and its simplicity made it all the more terrible. It was a wooden frame, usually about 7 feet long, with rollers at each end. The accused would be laid flat on their back, wrists bound to one roller, ankles to the other. Then, slowly, methodically, the rollers would be turned. The body would stretch. At first, the sensation was merely uncomfortable, a pulling at the joints, a tightness in the limbs. But the turning did not stop. As the rollers continued, the pulling became tearing. Shoulders dislocated from their sockets with audible pops. Hip joints separated. Knees and elbows bent at angles the body was never meant to achieve. The spine elongated until vertebrae cracked. In extreme cases, limbs were pulled entirely from the body. For women, the rack carried additional dimensions of violation. Before being placed on the device, the accused was often stripped, her clothing removed by male officials. The exposure itself was a form of torture in a society where female modesty was both demanded and weaponized. To be naked before strange men, to have your body handled and positioned, to lose even the dignity of covering this was calculated humiliation. The physical trauma was catastrophic. Women subjected to the rack often lost the ability to walk, to use their arms, to care for themselves. Even if they survived their interrogation, their bodies bore permanent damage. Joints that never healed properly. Chronic pain that would follow them for whatever remained of their lives. And the inquisitors recorded it all. The notary would write, "The accused was placed on the rack. 1 turn of the wheel. 2 turns. She maintains her denial. 3 turns. She cries out but does not confess. 4 turns." The clinical language disguised the screaming. The strappado, if the rack stretched the body horizontally, the strappado attacked it vertically. The accused's hands were tied behind her back, wrists bound tightly with rope. The rope was then threaded through a pulley attached to the ceiling beam. When the order was given, the rope would be pulled, hoisting the woman into the air by her arms. Imagine it. Your full body weight suspended from wrists bound behind you. Gravity becomes the torturer. Shoulders wrench backward and upward, joints straining against the unnatural position. The pain is immediate and total. But the strappado had refinements. Sometimes weights would be attached to the feet, 20 pounds, 50 pounds, more increasing the downward pull, multiplying the agony. Sometimes the woman would be hoisted up and then dropped suddenly, the rope catching her with a violent jerk that could tear shoulders completely from their sockets. This was called the strappado with drop, and it was considered particularly effective for extracting confessions. The anticipation of the drop, the moment of free fall before the rope caught, added psychological torture to the physical trauma. Women subjected to the strappado often lost the use of their arms permanently. The nerve damage was extensive. Shoulders that never functioned properly again. Arms that hung useless at their sides. One recorded case from 1485 describes a conversa woman accused of secretly practicing Jewish rituals. She was subjected to the strappado for 3 hours. The notary recorded that she maintained her innocence throughout, despite the evident agony. She was eventually released, not because she was found innocent, but because the inquisitors concluded that further torture would kill her before she confessed. She left the tribunal unable to lift her arms above her waist. The breast ripper, iron spider, some devices were designed specifically for women, targeting the parts of their bodies that marked them as female. The breast ripper, sometimes called the iron spider, was one such instrument. It was exactly what its name suggests, a claw-like device made of iron with 4 sharpened prongs that curved inward like talons. The device would be heated until the metal glowed red, then applied to the woman's breasts. The prongs would be clamped onto the breast tissue and then torn away, ripping flesh, muscle, and in some cases removing the breast entirely. The pain was beyond description. The physical mutilation was permanent. The psychological message was unmistakable. A woman's body could be destroyed at will by male authority. The breast ripper was often used in cases involving accusations of adultery, abortion, blasphemy, or witchcraft crimes that the Inquisition associated specifically with female sexuality and reproduction. It was punishment and interrogation combined, a device that inscribed the Inquisition's power directly onto the female body. Historical records suggest that women subjected to this device often died from shock, blood loss, or subsequent infection. Those who survived carried scars that marked them forever, both physically and as social outcasts, their mutilated bodies visible evidence of their supposed sins. This history is disturbing, but it is important to remember. These were real women who suffered real torture at the hands of an institution that believed it was doing God's work. If you think these stories matter, if you believe we must confront even the darkest chapters of history, leave a comment below. Why do you think it's crucial we don't forget these stories? The water torture. Not all torture left visible scars. Some methods attacked the body from within. The water torture, known in Spanish as toca, involved forcing water into the accused's body until they felt they were drowning. The woman would be bound to an angled table, head lower than feet. Her mouth would be forced open, sometimes with an iron device, and a cloth would be placed over her face. Then the water would begin. Poured slowly, steadily, soaking the cloth. The woman would gasp for air and inhale water instead. The sensation was of drowning while still conscious, unable to breathe, panic flooding the system. The stomach would distend with water. The lungs would burn. The body would convulse involuntarily. The inquisitors could control the experience, precisely stopping when the woman was on the edge of unconsciousness, allowing her to vomit up the water, then beginning again. Sessions could last hours. A woman could be subjected to water torture, fail to confess, and be released without obvious evidence of what had been done to her, though internally the damage could be severe. Lungs weakened by repeated aspiration. Psychological trauma that made the mere sight of water trigger panic. Other devices. The Inquisition's inventory of suffering did not end there. Thumb screws and leg screws were smaller devices that crushed fingers, toes, and shins, breaking bones incrementally. These were often used on women accused of minor offenses or as preliminary torture before escalating to more severe methods. The chair of nails, though less commonly documented in Spanish Inquisition records, was a seat studded with iron spikes. The accused would be forced to sit while weights were added to their lap, driving the spikes deeper into flesh. Each device was part of a larger system. But who were the women who endured this? What were their names? What were their stories? That's what we need to understand next, because these were not abstract victims. They were daughters, mothers, sisters, healers, and believers. They were human beings whose lives were destroyed by a system that saw them as less than human.